Hello, everyone. Hello. To the local audience and to the audience online, which is definitely more people than in this room. That's an intelligent guess. My name is Jacobson. I welcome you to the Wednesday Night Live, a class that I've been giving now for many years, shall we say. Older than some of you probably who are listening to me here. Goes back to 1982. In an unbroken chain, never been advertised, word of mouth. So everyone here, everyone participating is literally in a part of a chain, a link that goes back. That would be 32 years. So it's an honor to be able to be part of such a journey. But actually, what's 32 years in the scheme of history? The Jewish people have been around for several thousand years, so 32 is not that much. But on the other hand, there are not that many classes that go on for 32 years, so I'm not saying to toot my horn or toot this class's horn, it's just an observation. I'd like to share one of the dilemmas that I've always had. I myself grew up in a traditional Jewish home, a Chabad Hasidic home actually. So what the New York Times would call an ultra-Orthodox sect. They wouldn't use the word cult because they may be sued for that, but a sect is like a borderline cult essentially. Who wants to be part of a sect? And at the same time, I always knew that the Torah's message and the Jewish message was not just for ghettos or for parochial partisan groups, but it was always meant to be a universal message for the entire world. Because if there is a God, God created the world, all people are universe, meaning 7 billion people. So if He gave guidance and wants the world to fulfill, so to speak, the divine plan, the question is, what is that plan for the entire universe? And that's always the Torah, as I always understood it, as a universal blueprint. It's actually not my own observation. The Medrash actually says that just like an architect uses a blueprint by which he or she follows to build a structure, so too God, Pesrois Punkasois, is an Aramaic term for the drawings and the sketches of a blueprint, which is the Torah, which is God's so-called life operator manual. The fact that many parts of the Torah may address certain segments of the population, in other words, particularly Jews, or within Jews, some are for Kohanim, priests, and Levites, and Israelites, that comes down to, obviously human beings are different, so a blueprint has to address different human beings based on their particular personalities. Women, men, children, and so on. So, but nevertheless, it's a universal blueprint. And as such, I've always had this dilemma. In a traditional environment, usually a talk or a class begins with, they say it says in this week's Parsha and so on, even though for so many people that's a turnoff, when you hear a Dvar Torah on Shabbos, they say in this week's Parsha. Some people, as soon as they hear that, they fall asleep and shut down. But that's the traditional way. You start with reading the Parsha of the Torah, which, for those that don't know what a Parsha means, the chapter. There are 52 weeks in the year, corresponding to that 52 chapters. And you ask questions and counter questions, and then you build your case of what's called a Dvar Torah, a thought, hopefully with a personal and relevant message. But for many people, beginning with that approach is, as I said, a turnoff, especially if they don't know what a parsha is and they don't have any relationship with it, didn't grow up with it. So I discovered in my own journeys that if you really want to communicate well, and even for people who did grow up with what a parsha is, so to speak, quote unquote, it's best always to begin with something that's relevant to people's lives. You bring up some type of human challenge, something that addresses either our relationships, pain, anything that gets someone's attention, because that's an issue they're struggling with anyway. And then you introduce a perspective that comes from the Torah, that they can then be receptive to. Just to demonstrate the extent of this distinction, so years ago, when I began giving this class, so the core group of people who came to the class were people from the arts and entertainment industry. And mostly Jews, some non-Jews, and let's put it this way: they were spiritual, but not in any way what we call traditional Jewish. Some grew up in traditional homes, some did not. And if you ask them where they got their spirituality from, they would say things like Zen Buddhism or some other Far Eastern discipline, and a thing called, we can mention it here, LSD. And However, we had this conversation. Frankly, anything that was so-called traditionally Jewish, Torah-based, did not speak to them. Either because they had gone through their bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah lessons and were turned off by it, or they found it irrelevant, or whatever it may be. Everyone has their story. And it's really the story of most Jews today, actually. They don't necessarily see Torah as a relevant message to their lives. So I recognizing this, and I've shared this story many times. It's a little humorous, but it actually captures a very critical point, and that was recognizing this dilemma. I realized sitting there with a beard and a yarmulke, myself, I know I was not projecting a neutral image, so I realized I may be eliciting all kinds of stereotypes. You never know when you're speaking to people what they're thinking, because they're not saying it. So I realized that even before I open my mouth, I'm already at a disadvantage, perhaps, because who knows? I may remind one person of an angry grandfather that schlepped him to synagogue in Yom Kippur against his will, or her will, or an irrelevant Hebrew school teacher, or maybe even good memories, but definitely, as I said, not neutral. So I tried an experiment. And the experiment was, instead of using any language that was associated with anything religious or Jewish, I created my own language. I didn't use any word that was loaded. I didn't use the word God, I didn't use the word Torah, I didn't use the word mitzvahs. Instead of God, I used the word the essence of reality, the higher reality. For a particularly new age group, I use words like, for God, undefined layers of unconscious energy or something like that. For Torah, I use the word blueprint. For mitzvahs, I use the word connections. And for Mashiach, I use the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent and pontificating about the journey toward the essence of yourself and the essence of reality, following a blueprint, reaching a destination where there's a seamless integration and fusion between matter and spirit, and who you are and what you do, your inside and your outside, your etc. And I realized everybody was really taken. People were even mesmerized by the whole subject matter. And I smiled to myself. I was completely not exposing my so-called sources. After a few weeks, a guy came over to me. He happened to be a musician, and he says to me, "Are you talking about God? These weeks?" And I said, "Yes, but don't spoil it for the others." And what happened was even better than I expected, because I didn't use any loaded words, which everybody can define in their own way. The word God, for example. What does the word God mean? It's really a meaningless word, frankly. Because as Levi Yitzchak Berditchever once said to a self-proclaimed atheist, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. That's what he said. So before we agree or disagree about God, we have to first define God. Look, if God is a man, an old man with a long white beard that sits on a throne in heaven, nursery school type of God, and strikes us with lightning when we misbehave, many people, including myself, would call myself an atheist, if that's the definition of God. If you have a different definition, let me hear it before we agree or disagree. So here's such a common word, maybe one of the most common of all words, God. And I don't think beyond if you gave out a note to everybody in this room or anyone listening and said, define God in one paragraph without using any Hebrew words, I don't think two people would write the same thing. Besides the prerequisites, supreme being, creator, first cause, whatever it is, a little more personal definition, it's not so simple. And more importantly, where do we get our definition of God from? Where's the definition? Which dictionary do we follow? Most of our definitions of God come from our childhood, from what our parents told us, what we learned at school, and what we picked up here and there. Is that a real definition of God? Is it not? Is it distorted? Is it completely distorted? Partially not? What is it? So of course, everybody challenged will come up with some thoughts, but the word really is, if anything, more confusing than clarifying. So though language can be a connector, in today's day and age, they say everything is about communication. No one knows what you're thinking. In therapy, it's always break the silence. How could he or she know what you're thinking? You have to communicate, articulate, build the courage, break the silence. And communication is a key to any relationship. But communication has another side to it, which is a downside, that my word may cause you to go ballistic. Words are loaded. And for me, a word can be innocuous, meaningless, like innocent. And you hear it, it may remind you of a word every time your mother had a tantrum. That's what she used. So it evokes all kinds of feelings. And it's critical in communication is not to use words that you think are conveying the idea. You have to understand what the other person is hearing. And just a simple, like, marital advice, so to speak. When two people communicate and they keep getting into the same argument, sometimes just rephrasing the words can be less threatening. Because you keep using the same words, the other person, every time they hear that word, it right away triggers something. So words can also be create walls between us. And here is a perfect example, especially when it comes to religious issues, which are so loaded and so filled with all kinds of fraught with meanings and so on. For many people, the word religion, knee-jerk reaction, and I've tested this, for most people in today's society, in the Western secular society, the word religion is associated with words like this, without thinking: guilt, anger, punishment, conscience, just judgment, condescension, etc. Can you imagine? So a word that some people would consider to be the basis of their life really evokes almost every negative possible word. Fear, and so on. Because that's how religion is taught very often. So that's what we associate with. In the United States, there are statistics that show, very interesting statistics. 90% of Americans will say they have some relationship with something spiritual. They identify themselves as somewhat spiritual, even believing in God. And 40% will associate with a religion. 40 to 90% is not a small little distinction. It's not 5. It's a big distinction, which essentially saying that most people don't associate religion with spirituality, which happens to be the case. The more religious, the less spiritual. The more spiritual, the less religious. Religion is seen as ritual, tradition, even if there are positives in it, but it's not seen as free-spirited. It's not seen as soulful. It's not seen as warm, personal. It's seen as dogmatic rules. Good. You can make the argument these rules keep an order in society, morality, but it's not associated with words. Spirituality, the knee-jerk reaction to people's spirituality is warmth, open-heartedness, self-expression, self-actualization, soul, music, and so on. So it's interesting just how words elicit different reactions. I don't know what they elicit inside of you, if you've given it some thought, but it's an interesting way of a good benchmark, a good yardstick to recognize where you stand. So this experiment just demonstrated what I was saying earlier, is that it's a challenge to really communicate in relevant ways. Often you have to avoid using any word. So the word parsha, for some people, means nothing, so they're not getting through someone who doesn't know what it means. For some people it's a turn-off, and for some people they relate to it. So in truth, I always struggle with this in this class as well. Sometimes I'll just begin with a topic completely very universal and very non-Jewish. There are people who heard this class. I remember someone who came to the class a number of years ago. Well, it has happened more than once. And when they met me, they literally almost fainted. And I said, what disturbs you? They said, I never thought that you look like this. I said, like what? A beard with a yarmulke? You sounded to me like a guy that was like clean shaven, no yarmulke. I would never imagine that you are orthodox. So I said, why do you call me orthodox? Why are you insulting me? You know? Why don't you just call me a human being? I'm just a human being, you know. If you want to call me a Jew, that's trying, if you like. But people stereotype. That's how it is. I remember after I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life, so going back a number of years ago, so I was traveling right after the book was published. The publisher sent me on this royal book tour across the country, and I went. And every city you go, there's book signings in the different stores, local bookstores, Barnes and Noble, Borders, that was still around then, and of course also local media, radio, television. So I was on the Cleveland morning show, television. This is a morning show. You're only on like 5-10 minutes. It's a short interview. Live morning show, and I come into the studio and I sit down, and the interviewer, we are live. There's no time for editing anything. So the interviewer, a woman, says to me, I'm shocked. I read your book, which I love. I think it's one of the best books I've ever read on psychology, spirituality. I never expected you to look like this. This is all on live television, mind you. So I said, what'd you expect I look like? And what would you like me to look like? And do you think I should be like satisfying your expectations of what I should look like? And then she said to me, but being that you're writing universally, why is it that you feel that, don't you think it would be more receptive, people would be more receptive if you looked like the average Western secular person? So I said, first of all, I'm not here to satisfy anybody what their expectations are. I'm here to be myself. And frankly, this may be a good opportunity to challenge stereotypes. Do I have to start dressing like you or someone else? And would you say the same thing, let's say, if you were speaking to a Saudi Arabian prince? Anyway, I didn't mean to insult her. I just meant to tit for tat. She challenged me, so I responded. But I realized, and not that I was trying to be cute, I realized there is a big challenge in this regard, because, listen, packaging, as much as they say don't judge a book by its cover, everybody does. And it's $1 billion industry, covers and packages. That's a fact. So the cliche, don't judge a book by its cover. You know somebody that doesn't? Why is everybody investing in covers and in packages and so on? Because we do judge books by their cover. That's how it is. We are sensory creatures that respond to sensory stimulation, which means our eyes, sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. And most of us, if that's not appealing to us, are not interested that inside the package is a beautiful thing if it doesn't look beautiful on the outside. And even in Judaism, beauty has value. It says, Zeh keli v'anveyu, that beautify your mitzvahs. A mezuzah should be beautiful, a Torah scroll should be beautiful, the Shabbos table should be beautiful. At the same time, we say, Sheker achein hevla yofi, that only outer beauty without inner beauty obviously is hollow, is vain, is empty. But you need to have, basically, inside and out should be beautiful. That's the objective. In the Torah, we talk great qualities of our matriarchs, that they were yefas mara, yefas teyar, beautiful features, beautiful sculpted faces, and so on. So, this is a challenge. I think everybody may have it in different ways, but I have it all the time because I deal very much with the secular world, most of my preoccupation, and with their stereotypes are very profound, and frankly, they're invisible. It's very hard to fight a stereotype. No one tells you they're stereotyping, but that's like the invisible wall that you have to always deal with in communication. So, going to the subject matter, this is just a small of a preface. The topic here is, are you in control? Do you control your destiny? That's the title. So, title like that, we know it from our statistics, a title like that draws many people to listen. If I wrote Insights into Parsha Vayechi, we'd have probably 10% of the same amount of listenership, even though it may be exactly the same thing. Now, this is not trying to be cute and not trying to fake it or try to in any way be manipulative, because the difference is relevance or not relevance. Insights into Parsha Vayechi, some people may be interested, some may not. Do you control your destiny is definitely more interesting to most people, even people who frankly value what a parsha is and what the Torah is, because then it's relevant. It means something. It's a topic I like to know about. Some of us think our lives are predestined. If you look at your life plan, by the time you're an adult to be able to even look at it, 99% of the choices were made for you. Like, for example, what home you grew up in, the attitudes of your parents, what school, education you received, peer and social pressure, expectations. And I'm speaking even in a healthy environment, which you have healthy parents, nurturing, building your self-confidence. Even there, these choices were made not by you. I'm not saying that is a bad thing, it's just the reality. Children can't make choices of their own, what school to go to when you're 3 years old or 4 years old, or later. Take into account that most families are dysfunctional to some extent in our day and age. So it's not just a matter of influences; it's also sometimes bad influences. Insecure parents create usually insecure children, and so on. I'm not getting even into extreme abuse situations. So by the time you grow into an adult and you're ready to build your own life, your own relationships, you have a stacked deck, a deck of cards that was dealt to you that you did not control at all. So many people wonder whether my life is altogether in my control. And then, of course, the big question whether God predestines our lives. Because who put us into these families? And what personality do you have? And what kind of genetic makeup? Nurture, nature. The bottom line is, we're not suddenly at 20, 30 years old, you're not neutral, you're not a clean slate. You're filled with impressions, filled with attitudes that shaped your life, for good or for bad. So it's an obvious question, are we trapped there? Some people growing up in privileged homes and have everything, have certain privileges. Sometimes that creates even its own challenges. Some people growing up in that environment feel completely emasculated, don't have any control over themselves because money controlled them. And they feel sometimes completely held hostage by that. I mean, the list goes on. I'm not going to go through every possible scenario across the spectrum. Everybody can fill in the blanks. But clearly all of us have our life map pretty much choreographed before you or even old enough to be able to make any decisions. So it's a very big question. And then when it comes to big issues like who we're going to choose for our soulmates, who we marry, what kind of life are we going to live, all these things come to, let's say, haunt us or affect us. Because suddenly, all these forces come into play. Because when you build your own relationships, your emotional well-being, your emotional state of being, rather, is defined by all these forces that shaped you. So it's not just some type of academic discussion, what home you grew up in, what environment you grew up in. It affects every choice you make. The way we are tentative with fears of commitment. The list goes on. Everything is affected. So the question of predestined is a big question. And then, of course, if you're a more spiritual person and you wonder about, as I said, the bigger plan, in Judaism is the concept of Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. Divine providence immediately evokes in people, okay, God leads the footsteps of a human being, so then God is the one that decides all our choices. So then where is there room for free will? Is there room for free will? And as I said, this question can be phrased in so many different ways. So the cynics say about free will, you must believe in free will, we have no choice. That's how they put it. But in practical terms, the question is, if you have all these predispositions and preset, let's put programming, that we're all programmed by, where is there room for free choice? And yet, Maimonides, in the Sefer Mishnah Torah, his classic magnum opus, writes clearly that despite the fact that our personalities, whether you'll be strong or weak, tall or short, blue eyes, green eyes, or black eyes. I've never seen red eyes. The red eye flights, but there's no red eye. But the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, your height, so many parts of our human features and physical features, that's not up to us. But how you use them, that's where free will comes in. And he makes a very strong case and says that you have free will, he calls it Yesod Chazak V'Amud, a very strong pillar and foundation of all of Judaism. It's fundamental because without free will, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility. How could the Torah expect of us anything if we can't choose, if it's all been predestined? So it's a big question and has, as I said, many, many implications. In a more subtle way, some people have come to, maybe by default, a certain resigned sense of fatality. Well, whatever I do is not going to make any real difference. Whatever I do, I'm going to end up anyway at the same place. So why should I go make an effort and fight or battle and take on any particular challenge when at the end, as I said, the end is anyway predestined. So even though we may not deliberately come to that conclusion, but by default, it becomes almost like a certain default state comfort zone that many of us fall into that trap. And we said, whatever I do doesn't work anyway. It's going to be it's planned by God, or however, or luck, or mikra and nikris, whatever happened by accident. And therefore, why make any effort? So of course it gets into the whole topic of human effort. How much should we fight for something? You could end up with a certain type of like a resignation and, as I said, a certain fatalistic attitude, where you end up not fighting for anything. It becomes very, very apathetic about many things. Sadly, this is the state of many people are in. More apathetic approach, especially when things have not worked exactly as you planned them, you invested, etc. In relationships, this happens very often. People have been in very loving relationships and then they get hurt, or there's a betrayal of trust. And then what happens is, like any wound, you don't want to go back, revisit your wounds. And you're very, very careful not to allow yourself, if you have a wound, just like a physical wound, you don't want someone punching you there again, or hurting it. So we avoid these situations. And this slowly, as we grow older, becomes our more default state where we avoidance. When we're younger, we're more idealistic, ready to take more risks, free abandon, as they say. Get older, we're more calculated, more set in our ways. Just like our arteries harden, so do our attitudes. And as a result, what happens is you start giving up on some of your dreams and some of your you're going to change something big, fundamental. And what settles in is the voice, that quiet voice, as King Solomon writes in Koheles, those very resigned voice that says, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The way he puts it is, a generation comes and a generation goes, and there's nothing new under the sun. All the rivers flow to the sea, and the sea doesn't get filled. And you read it, it's very depressing, because you end up saying, hey, what's the point? Many people thought they were significant and indispensable, and they found out they weren't. Anyway, I don't want to reinforce this voice. I'm not going to continue dwelling on it. You hear it enough in the world around. You didn't come here to hear another resigned voice of fatalism. But I just wanted to state that this is, unfortunately, the inner voices that some of us are affected by. And it ends up creating a situation where you lower your expectations of yourself, of others, and sadly, your own potential remains trapped. In Thoreau's depressing words, he says that most men lead lives of quiet desperation and die with their song still inside them. And to me, that's like the worst possible thing that could happen to a person. Obviously, there are worse physical tragedies and losses, but psychically, spiritually speaking, cosmically speaking, to die with your song still inside you, which means that you were blessed and given certain potential and you never actualized it. I mean, it's a pretty sad thing. It means a life wasted. We can't say any life is completely wasted, because all of us, I'm sure, have done things that have helped yourself, helped others. But to find out that your greatest potential, the things that really your voice was shut down, was silenced due to pain, due to others not supporting or encouraging you, is not a pleasant thing to think about. So I'm of the belief, and I stated here very loud and clear, that I believe that Torah Judaism is meant to help people actualize themselves. God did not create us for us to become locked and trapped in our own environments and based on the pressures of people around us. That to find yourself is finding the God within you. When Abraham became that pioneer and rejected everybody and found and forged his own path, that was godly. And Judaism was always epitomized by the pioneers, by nonconformists, by revolutionaries, by visionaries. How religion became such a force of conformity is another discussion, not for now. But it's very different from what it was at its inception. It was about changing the world. Mordechai, every bow to Haman. Mordechai would not bow, because a Jew doesn't bow to anything that to men and man-made inventions. We don't bow to things that are man-made. We bow to eternal things, to things that are to the greater reality, as I put it. So this issue of predestination, predestined lives is a big one that has many, many implications. When it comes to shidduchim, of course, shidduchim is what do you call it? Shidduch is, everyone knows what a shidduch. Shidduch is like the word chutzpah today. Everybody knows what it means. It means a match. So here too, of course, the big question is: are matches made in heaven? You know. Sometimes you hear in the Talmud it says that 40 days before children are born, there's an announcement in heaven that says this boy to this girl. So it seems that's all designated, all predestined. Then sometimes you find expressions that speak about that it's up to our actions. That due to our actions, the person who was designated as your soulmate can change. And what about second marriages? And what about, God forbid, deaths? And so on and so forth. So this is a big discussion. I'm not really going to address this because I have just talked about the topic of matches and soulmates in the past. And if any of you are interested more about it, I actually wrote a long essay that discusses all the different opinions in Torah about it. A very fascinating discussion on the different opinions. Just email us and be happy to send you a link. Or you can look on our website, Meaning for Life, and you'll find it. But I do want to touch upon it at least because it's also part of this discussion. Because then people say, listen, I put all this hishtadlus, as the expression goes, efforts to finding my soulmate, and does it really make a difference? You know, God is the one that planned it all, so God will send it to me, and why do I have to make any effort? And what effort, and many efforts I make, some people say, you know, the more efforts I do, the worse it gets. So maybe I should just sit home and wait for my soulmate to arrive. On the other hand, we all understand the folly of that approach, because then the blessing may be there for you, but you're locked in your basement. So how are you going to find that soulmate? So of course, this issue of predestined, is our soulmate predestined? Are they predestined for us or not? Is also a big part of this whole discussion. So what is the story about it? And as I said, at the end of the day, even if we have to say, and clearly I'm going to lead to the point that our lives are not predestined, the fact remains, as I mentioned before, that most of the decisions, the major elements of your life, as it stands now, were decided for you, not by you. So how does one deal with that? What are you supposed to do? Ignore all the influences and start from scratch? That's impossible. There's no way that a person can do that. So however we explain it, we need to understand how do you balance it with all those, with the platter and this, as I said, the deck of cards that have already been dealt to you, for good or for bad. So all this, yes, is addressed and answered in this week's parsha. And as I said, in a very seemingly enigmatic story, episode that some of you may be familiar with. If not, regardless, I'll just sum it up. So this week's parsha is the last chapter in the book of Genesis, called Vayechi Yaakov. Jacob lived. He lived his last 17 years in the land of Egypt, where the continuing story talks mostly about the passing of Jacob. I don't say death because actually the Talmud focuses and Rashi bring cites that it doesn't say that Jacob died. So there's an element of Jacob living on through his children, etc. But this is about the passing of Jacob. Interestingly, the chapter is called the life of, and Jacob lived. Vayechi, and he lived. There's a similar parallel to that. A number of chapters back in Genesis, Chayei Sarah is a similar thing. The chapter is called the life of Sarah, and it talks all about her passing, which again is a topic I've addressed in the past, essentially teaching us that life is not as we understand it in a biological sense. Real life you can really see is the years after a person passes away. The fact that we can sit here in the year 2013, end of 2013, and talk about people who lived over 3,500 years ago tells you that something lived on. So in a way, the real life of Jacob is demonstrated in what happens after his passing. Anyway, the story continues that Jacob is preparing, knowing that his last days are numbered. So the chapter begins. Well, the big part of the chapter is the blessings that Jacob gave to all his children, to all the tribes. But in the earlier parts of the chapter, he summons Joseph. Now remember, you all know the story. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. 22 years he was separated from them, and then because of the famine, they were reunited in very dramatic circumstances. And they all moved down to Egypt. When they say all, Jacob and his 70 souls, families, all his children and families moved to Egypt due to the famine. The next chapter would be the beginning of the long and difficult exile in Egypt. But meanwhile, times are good now. As a matter of fact, the Baal HaTurim says, Vayechi Yaakov, 17 years. 17 is Gematria Tov, good. Because these were Jacob's best years. Ironically, his best years were in Egypt. Because the rest of his life, he suffered. He suffered first for many years running from Esav, then he suffered for 20 years with his father-in-law Laban. As he tells Paro in last week's chapter, that my years have been short and painful. So the last 17 years were relatively peaceful years. By Yeshiv Yaakov it says he wanted to live in peace, and then Joseph sold into slavery. The last 17 years he lived with his family. It was relative peace. 17 good years. So as I said, now comes the end of the story, and he summons Joseph, who was the savior, essentially the viceroy of Egypt, who due to the fact that he stored up on the grain, he was able to sustain Jacob and his family, and of course the entire population of the world, turned Egypt into a superpower. So Joseph is summoned by Jacob, and Jacob says to him, I know that you had children here in Egypt, so I'd like you to bring them and introduce them to me, and I'd like to bless them. So the story tells the story in a very emotional way, how Joseph comes with his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim are their names, and he presents them to his son, now to his father. Jacob was, because of his age, was difficult for him to see, so he asked him, who are they? That's how the expression is. He says to him, the exact expression is, Mi Eila, who are these? Who are they? So Joseph answers and says, these are the children that I gave birth to here, that God blessed me with here. Please bless them. And then he continues and he says, he hugged them and kissed them, Jacob, his grandchildren. And then Joseph, the Torah dwells on one interesting verse where it says that Joseph placed them the way the expression it says. I'll say it in Hebrew. He says, "Vayikach Yosef v'shneim es Ephraim b'yaminoi mismael Yisrael v'es Menashe b'smeilei miyamin Yisrael v'yigesh alav." That Joseph placed Menashe to his own left, Joseph's left, which is to the right of Jacob, and placed Ephraim to his own right, which is to the left of Jacob. Because Menashe was the B'char, the older one, so he put him on the right side of Jacob to get so-called the right blessing, the first blessing, the primary blessing. And Ephraim, the second blessing. Right and left, which we'll discuss. So the Torah says that Vayishlach Yisrael es Yaminei, Vayosher Reish Ephraim, that what happened was that what Jacob did, he crossed his hands like this. And he put his right hand. So even though Menashe was standing here, and Joseph intended that he should place his right hand on Menashe and his left hand on the second child, he crossed his hands and put his right hand on Ephraim, his left hand on Menashe. And he blessed them, which was different than Joseph's intentions. And the Torah makes it a point to tell us the story. The word used for his crossing his hands was Shikel es Yadav. Sichel es Yadav. Ki Menashe. He crossed his hands. So the obvious question is, in this story, it's important to know there's blessings, but to know this whole, the details of him putting a right and to the left and crossing his hands, what's the significance of this? Why do we need to know this? Why do we need to emphasize that Joseph was wrong in a way, in his intentions? And above all, why didn't he bless Menashe, who was the firstborn? So clearly, Jacob saw that he needs to bless Ephraim with a more primary blessing. So what's the whole significance of this whole episode, this exchange? And the meaning of Mi Elah, who are they? I mean, he just summoned, he told him, I want to bless your children, come bring them to me. So what is this also emphasizing, like Jacob making a point, Mi Elah, who are they? Well, in this little episode here contains tremendous lessons in our personal lives, especially in the area of what I was describing before, predestined and choice. And the general answer given to the question of why did Jacob not bless Menashe with a primary blessing? So there's a discussion in some texts, some of the more mystical texts that talk about the difference. When you come to somebody, let's say for a blessing, I want to have a bracha. People come to a tzaddik, to a righteous person, or even we bless each other. On Shabbos, parents bless their children. Often we're actually using the blessings that Jacob gave these grandchildren of his. The day before Yom Kippur, Paul Konidre is accustomed to bless our children. So we bless each other. And then we just bless, even strangers bless each other. Earlier we learned that Abraham was told, everyone who blesses you shall be blessed. So blessing is a common expression. We bless people. But then there's another concept in Judaism which is called praying for somebody. This we hear more when we make a Misha Berach. Someone, God forbid, is ill in the hospital, or ill in any way, or needs a special blessing, this particular situation, vulnerable situation, so we pray for them. We don't just say we bless them, we pray for them. So in Hebrew, one is called bracha, a blessing, and one is called tefillah, a prayer. And the same is true with tzaddikim too. Sometimes people go to the Kotel, the Western Wall, or they go to other holy places where they pray there. They don't just bless. So what's the distinction between a prayer and a blessing? To pray for something, or pray for someone, or give somebody a blessing. What's the difference between the two? Should you ask someone should I pray for you, or should I bless you? And people often, when they ask their friends or ask others, pray for me or bless me. This is not just a difference in terms, it's not just semantics. There is actually a key distinction between the two. And the answer given is that the difference between bracha and tefillah, between a blessing and a prayer, is the following. Bracha comes from the word mavrich. A mavrich means to channel. To channel. So a bracha means when you give someone a blessing, you're basically saying to them that your potential, you have that element in your potential, and I'm blessing that the channel should open up, and there shouldn't be any block from your potential to your actual. So you're predestined with something, and bracha is to open up the channel, which is something very important, because even though you may have the potential for something, sometimes there's blockages. We may not be able to see that blessing. So a blessing is meant to be like opening up a channel. Opening up of a channel, that's something that's already there. Tefillah, on the other hand, prayer has the ability to actually change destiny. We say in Hebrew, we say in the prayer, we say, Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Meaning that, for example, God forbid someone's not well, ill, we pray to God that even though obviously you allowed that person or you wanted that person to become not well, that's the plan, I'm begging you, I'm beseeching you to change your mind. You should have a new ratzon, a new desire, and open up a new channel. So basically, prayer opens new channels where blessings only open existing channels. That's the key distinction. Now, each has a quality that the other does not have. When a blessing is the quality is, it doesn't require as much effort. Because the potential is there. Think of it like digging for oil, or digging a well. The well is there. You need effort to dig and find the water, but you don't have to dig in a place where there's no water. There's water there. It's a matter of just digging deep enough to be able to access it. When you give someone a blessing, you're not creating any new channels. What you're doing is opening the channels that are already there. It's like saying to somebody, you have potential, but the potential is not actualized. I bless you that you should be able to open. So it's more guaranteed that it will work. Prayer, on the other hand, is not something that's pre-existing. You need to open up a new door that didn't exist. So it's not necessarily as guaranteed. On the other hand, prayer has the quality that it can open up new channels. It could open up new things that were not there before. Whereas a blessing does not have that power. And that's why Jacob was not praying for Ephraim and Manasseh. He was blessing them. So he saw in his prophetic vision that Ephraim needs to get these and these blessings because he was able to see his potential. So it wasn't a matter of him putting his right hand on Manasseh. That blessing doesn't belong to Manasseh. So he had to cross his hands. If he was praying for them, he could say, even though Manasseh doesn't deserve or doesn't have the potential, this and this blessing, I'm praying that he should get it. But this was not a prayer, this was a blessing. And a blessing is about identifying something that you already have and just revealing it. That's a very big difference. And that's why Jacob did not follow what Joseph had planned, because he was not praying, he was blessing. And a blessing cannot change the destiny of someone. It opens up the channel, and that's what he saw. So he saw that Manasseh's destiny was such destiny, Ephraim's was this. The blessing was to make sure that it would be actualized. And prayer has a completely different role. Now, of course, you could ask the question, why didn't he pray for them? Because this is not the place for prayer. This is the end of Jacob's life. It's a time for blessing all the tribes, including Manasseh and Ephraim. What this means in our particular lives, it means the following. Speak a little more psychologically speaking. Each of us has a tremendous amount of potential. Do you have any clue how much potential you have? No clue. I once tried an experiment. I've shared this, I believe. It was, I could tell, a non-scientific survey that I did. I asked around 200, 300 people, to be precise, 250 people. It was over a period of time. People of the ages from 8 till 80, 85. And I asked them all the same question. The question, and this was people of all backgrounds. Men, women, and children, of course, but both male and female. Jews and non-Jews, religious, not religious, of all backgrounds. I intentionally did it to cover as much spectrum, the widest spectrum possible. And the question was, in terms of percentage, with 100% being total and 1% being 1%, how much do you know of yourself? How self-aware are you? With 100% being totally self-aware and 1% being 1 out of 100 self. And the fascinating result was very simple. Once you hear it, you'll see that it's obvious. But I didn't know it until I tried the survey. No matter who the people were, whether it was white or black, Jewish or not Jewish, it all came down to age. Everyone of a certain age answered the same, and it was all about age. So this had nothing to do with any other element except age. And here were the answers. The 8-year-olds, which took a while to first even explain the question, but let's say the young teenagers, the young teens, all answered. The numbers were like 60%, 40%, 50%, and by the time I'm 25 or 30, I'll know 80% of myself. That was their answer. And the older you go, the percentages drop. Every 80-year-old I asked said to me, I don't even know if it's 1%. One person actually said, more than one person said to me, how could I even know how much is actualized when I don't even know how much potential I have? This is based on you knowing objectively. You could say, okay, you know your tank has 20 gallons, it's only 1% full, but you don't know if the tank is 20 gallons or 40 gallons or a million gallons. So if you don't know what your potential is like, how can you even answer the question? Which is really the most honest answer. But it took them 80 years to find out that. So clearly it has a lot to do with one's ego and one's self-awareness. And the older, literally, without exaggeration, not one person, the older you go, the percentages drop. By the time around 40, 50 years old already, we're talking about lower than 10%. But the older it gets, the less and less it is. Which is interesting, because you'd think a person, the older they get, the more they know. But the more you know, the less you know, right? We had the joke in high school, which our teachers did not really like, was what they say. They say the more you study, the more you know. The more you know, the more you forget. The more you forget, the less you know. The less you know, the less you forget. The less you forget, the more you know. So why study? That was the you could try to figure out the flaw in that logic, okay? So the point is that the higher you climb on a mountain, the broader the horizon. In 1898, whether this is urban legend or not, is itself an argument online. Nobody even knows it's urban legend. They say in 1998, the patent officer of the United States, the U.S. patent officer, resigned. 1898, we're talking over 100 years ago. He resigned. Why? Because he said everything that could be invented has been invented. There won't be any need for a patent office. So whether this is a true story or not, but it's a nice story, a nice anecdote. Now, 1898. Why? Then they had. Okay, listen. 1898 was great. It was the end of the Industrial Revolution. So they had steam engines, electricity, the beginning of photography, a lot of the modern world. You know, the subway system in the United States in New York was built in 1910 and still holding up. So a lot of advancements. However, would anyone say today that everything that's been invented that could be invented has been invented? No. Remember, 1898 is before Einstein, before the computer age, before the atomic age, the nuclear age, and obviously before Apple. So a lot has happened. And today we've climbed to a higher point in the mountain where anyone will say today, as much as we know, there's definitely much more that we don't know. We know, for example, today that there aren't just molecules and atoms and subatomic particles, but we know there's subatomic particles. But someone will ask, how deep down the rabbit hole can we go? Who knows? It could be a million sub levels of subatomic particles, and we most likely will never reach them all. How many levels of the unconscious are there? Who knows? We know the conscious. We know there's an unconscious. We also know there must be an unconscious, but how deep does it go? We only can know what we empirically observe, what's been guessed, and so on. So my point is, knowledge doesn't necessarily brings you a lot more awareness. There's no question we know a lot more today than we did 100 years ago. But we also know that the horizon is far, far larger than we ever could imagine. So with knowledge comes also a certain element of humility if you're an honest person. And that's what was another observation of that age. But what's the point I want to make with those age groups is that when you talk about blessing and destiny and so on, the question is, what potential do you have inside of you? Do you know? How could we know? As a matter of fact, and you can observe it in your own life, most people's talents usually are revealed through accidents. As most inventions in this world came through accidents. You go through literally almost every innovation, including food, coffee, for example. Coffee, who would have thought that a coffee bean could become coffee? Or that you can take grain and turn it into bread? You know how many steps are necessary? Once fire was discovered, and heat and pressure, people tried things. They experimented. Most things they experimented yielded something else they never even intended to get. This is almost across the board. Very rarely was something discovered directly. They experimented and suddenly they discovered something else. And you find this even in our modern age. Many, many things that are complete result of other type of exploration and it yielded. The point I'm making is not that in any way to knock our efforts, it's that these things are mysterious and it's not that simple. Most potential that people have, usually, there are the instances, of course, you have a mentor or a parent that recognizes a talent and they help cultivate it in you. That's beautiful. But that's not the common, that's the exception. In most situations, you're suddenly in a situation where the person who's supposed to do a job is not around, there's no one else to do it, you end up doing it, and you did it not bad. And you realize, hey, I like this, or I'm good at it. We go to summer camp, there's a school project, no one knows who's good at what, you try different things, suddenly some people are good at something. Usually does not happen very premeditated. It happens. So then you wonder, how many of my potentials have not yet happened? How many accidents didn't happen in my life yet? Well, we don't believe in accidents. How many divine providences did not yet elicit certain things in me? So this actually should be a message of hope, that no matter how little you think of yourself, you have enormous potential that you have no clue about. And hopefully, with the right blessing, it'll open up the channels for you to be aware. So the importance of a blessing is a big thing. It's making you aware of something you have. We're not talking about giving you something new, even. Just discovering what you have and getting rid of the obstacles, the blocks, psychological blocks, fears, physical blocks, whatever it may be, the impediments, is a great thing. That's a blessing. It's opening up channels. Number one, channel of awareness, and number two, actual channels to access those talents. So it's a very big thing, a blessing in that sense, which is what Jacob did. Jacob, when he blessed each of the tribes, and when he blessed Manasseh and Ephraim, he looked into their souls, was able to see the way Jacob could see, like a visionary, their potential. And that's what he blessed them. And you look at each blessing, you'll see he's describing what their history will look like. And he's giving them the blessing that they should actualize and fulfill that which they are capable of. It's like telling somebody, may God bless you, that you should be able to actualize your greatest potential. It's an unbelievable blessing. Because many of us don't, and many of us are not even aware. I'll just use myself as a guinea pig, a kosher guinea pig. So I remember the first time I ever wrote something. Obviously I was in school and I did my writing, and I remember teachers saying that I could be a good writer. But the first time I actually tried something on my own, not as an assignment, which we all hate, or at least I hated them. Assignments don't make you feel good about it. So I was in summer camp. It was in Detroit. How old was I? I must have been around 17. 16 years old. And I was a staff member there, and the guy was supposed to write a song for Color War. I don't know if you know what Color War is, but these things they do in camp, long grown out of. But for that time being, it was very good. And actually, in this case, the guy was supposed to write a theme song. Got ill, fell ill. He was a good writer. He was known to be a good writer. He was actually chosen for that team to be the writer of the songs. So someone says to me, hey, your father's a writer. Why don't you try to write this song? I said, my father's a writer doesn't mean I'm a writer. So, yeah, but what do you got to lose? So I remember sitting down under a tree with a pen, and I started writing a song. And it came out pretty decent, relatively speaking. I look back at it today, it's a little embarrassing, but for that age and for where I was, it was not bad. It won we won the song, so to speak. But I tried my hand. I would never have done it had the guy not fell ill. He would have written it. And as because of that, I got a taste for it. Once I got a taste, I tried more. I started writing. Now, would it come out some other way? I'm sure maybe another thing would have happened. But it's a perfect example. And I see it. I've asked friends, I've asked people I know, people I don't know. And many people talented will tell you exactly the same thing. It usually comes out in times that you did not expect it. Suddenly there's a crisis, pressure, no one else there to do it. You end up doing it and you realize you can do it. So bottom line is that we have tremendous potential within us. That's number one. Then there's a second thing called tefillah, prayer. Prayer is opening up channels of things that you may not even have potential for. An example of prayer, to contrast it with Jacob's blessing, remember Moses also, at the end of the Torah, also blesses all the tribes. You have twice blessings. You have Jacob here at the end of Genesis, and Moses at the end of Deuteronomy, or end of Bereshis and end of Dvarim. He also blesses. But then we find prayer. Where's prayer? The old classic prayer is, of course, the big day of prayer is Yom Kippur. Prayer is when Moses stands on the mountain praying to God to forgive the Jewish people for their grave sin. You don't hear the word blessing there. You hear mispal, vayspal Moshe, vayschanan Moshe, veschanan. He beseeched, he begged, he implored of God. It's a whole different story here. What's the story here? The Jewish people, they basically betrayed God. 39 days after hearing, do not build false gods, went ahead and built a golden calf. Here's not the place to get into how they were able to do something like that so close to after they heard such a direct command. But they did. The Torah says Moses broke the tablets, not out of anger, it was actually quite premeditated, to save their lives actually. He tore up the contract before they received it, as Rashi explains. And he marches back up on the mountain to pray to God to forgive them. 80 days he prays. It took him 40 days to get the law. It took him 80 days to get forgiveness. And in Yom Kippur he finally comes down and is successful. On Yom Kippur night, we reenact the event by saying after Kol Nidre, 3 times we say that God says to Moses, Shalachti kidvarecha. I have forgiven them as you have asked me to do. So here, this is a whole different story. This was not actualizing potential. This was changing destiny, changing the course of history. Because the people deserved to be punished. They did something which was not forgivable. They, in a very deliberate way, not accident, it wasn't misunderstanding, very deliberately went and did the worst possible thing. After God made it very clear we have a relationship, they went and chose another false god of gold. They replaced God, basically. And yet Moses felt the need and the ability to open up a new channel. Why is Yom Kippur the holiest day of the year? Because it opened up a new channel, the channel called hope. That even if something is broken, and even if there may not be potential, you still can change destiny. And Moses, it took him 80 days to achieve it, and he finally achieved. What did he do? He was able to open up new channels. It's called the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim, the 13 attributes of compassion. God reveals to him, when Moses says, show me your face, show me your glory. So God reveals to him in secret. He tells me, here are the 13 attributes that whenever you're in time of crisis, use these words, and you'll be able to invoke new blessings, new channels. This is not a blessing, this is a prayer. So both in life, we have both, in psychological terms, you can say that we have on one hand, we have potential that may be locked in our unconscious, may be locked in a state that is not yet activated, but it's there. You are born with it. A newborn child is born with everything that will develop in your life. Even though a newborn may not yet use their mind or their emotions, it's not yet mature to that level, but you have to say it doesn't come later in life. It develops like everything develops. Whatever you have at 20, 30, 40 years old was there like in a seed when you were born. It's just a matter of actualizing it. And as I mentioned, there's many potentials that we have yet to actualize, no matter how old you are, no matter how self-actualized you think you are. So that is one aspect, a whole locked element of potential on many, many levels that we have within us, which a great part of life, and as I said, maybe the greatest blessing is if you're able to get rid of the blocks. And one of the big ones, as we'll soon discuss, is fear. You're able to release those potential. Fear is one of the biggest challenges, which we'll discuss. Then there's a whole other thing. A human being is able, and this is a God-given gift, to be able to open up channels that are not even predestined for you, meaning new channels. For that, there's a strong effort that's necessary. You need to do what Moses did. You need to break open new doors, and that is a whole other story. So when somebody comes, let's say, I counsel many people, and people come to me and they say, my life, I think I have bad luck. I think God doesn't like me, that type of thing. Because everything I do doesn't work. Whether it's for a job, whether it's for a parnasa, whether it's for a shidduch, whether it's for this. I remember very vividly a woman telling me she thinks she has an ayin hara on her, which is a bad, evil eye. She's been cursed. And she's coming to me to upsprechen, to eliminate this, to get rid of this evil eye. So I said to her, who exactly told you that I'm an expert in getting rid of evil eyes? You need a witch doctor. I'm not a witch doctor. You need some, black magic for this. She said, people told me that you can do this, Okay, so just in case you didn't know, I have the reputation that I can get rid of ayin haras. Whether it's true or not is another story. I don't know if I've ever gotten rid of one. But so I said, I'll tell you something I can do better than that. I have a trick that's better than getting rid of ayin haras, to show you that there is no ayin hara in you in the first place. How do you like that? I said, how are you so convinced you're cursed? Maybe you're just doing things wrong. Hey, did you think of that? Maybe you're just doing the wrong things, making the wrong move. Maybe it's not a curse. So she says to me, what do you mean? I've tried everything. I said, who decided you tried everything? How do you know it's everything? She says, I know that I did everything possible. I said, do you have any blind spots? There's a concept called blind spots? Yeah, I have blind spots, but I know what they are. So I say, well, that's not the definition of a blind spot. A blind spot means you don't know what it is, because then it wouldn't be a blind spot. The reason we are subjective human beings, and as subjective human beings, we don't see it all, including myself. It says, A person can see all blemishes except their own. Very often you can get upset at somebody for something they're doing, and you find out you're far worse than they are in that same area. But it's very easy to see it on someone else. It's like, good to give other people advice. I'm sure everybody here gives very good advice to others in areas that you yourself don't follow. We're masters of that art. It's part of the insane human condition. We have other mishigas, it's not the only one. So don't feel so bad, and don't feel so alone. We're all doing the same thing. That's also good. It's a little consolation, So I said to her, I said to maybe you have a blind spot, maybe you haven't tried everything. And I saw she's so adamant. I have no doubt that she didn't try everything, because her biggest problem is she's so obstinate. She's not even open to hear the possibility. Maybe there's something else you can try. So I said to her, it's a far greater miracle for me, far easier for me to get rid of an ayin hara than to convince you that there's other options. That's what I determined there. So sometimes the greatest challenge is simply to show someone they have the potential. To show them that all that's lacking is confidence. But confidence and fear is a very difficult thing to overcome. You see this all the time, even in very basic things. Look at some superstars and athletes. A few years ago, Roger Federer, the number one tennis player then, fell into a funk. Everybody is human, the same skills, nothing's happened. He wasn't hurt. Something got into his head. Either someone said something or whatever. And he lost his confidence, and he wasn't playing the same way. Same talent, nothing changed. It's not like his age or anything else. There was no objective way of identifying it. He hired a new coach, basically someone who knew how to get into his head. How much of the warfare in our lives is psychological? I discussed this last week at length. How many of our obstacles we are our own worst enemy? Who can even know? So the challenge of discovering that you have the capability. Number two, that not only you have the capability, but you have the ability to actualize your capability, and overcoming the fears, the lack of confidence, the fear of failure, the fear of judgment by others, etc., etc., or living up to other people's expectations instead of your own voice, is usually our biggest enemy. So a blessing of a tzaddik, in this case Jacob, can definitely help open a channel. But remember, even a blessing is not guaranteed, because you still need to do something. A blessing is coming to open up a channel. But if you're not ready to do anything, the blessing can't completely manifest. So step number one in any element, and I would say most of our challenges, is we don't even need the changing of our destinies. We simply need to access what our destiny has in store for us. Actualize our potential. So as much as our lives the script has been written, which is what home you grew up in, what kind of family, what education, all the cards I mentioned before that you're dealt with, those are, if you look at them all, none of them are about actualizing your potential. They're all about attitudes. What do you pick up at home? Your attitude. If you grow up in a home that's very confident and secure people, adults, parents, and they cultivate and nurture you and love you and reinforce and validate you, then you have the confidence to take on every challenge. They don't give you your gifts, you were born with them. But an environment that is a healthy environment will help you build the confidence that you can take on the world. I had a father, Olav Shalom, who was that type himself, absolutely supremely confident. And the message he conveyed to all of us siblings was, you can do anything you wish you can do. And it wasn't just words that he said when we were 30 years old. From a youngest age, it was the message. It was very clear. These things have very deep impact. Now that doesn't mean he can write your script, your father, your mother. Doesn't mean anyone writes your script, but it means it gives you the confidence. That's what a great blessing is like. It's a blessing saying you're able to do it. Now go ahead and do it. It still takes work. You still have to actualize it. But imagine someone told you you're absolutely able to do it, and someone you trust, and you really feel it deep in your gut. It's a whole different attitude. It's like once upon a time there was a custom in some armies, when they went to war, even before the first battle, they would march with a victory march. The song you usually sing after you finish the battle, victorious. How do you go into war fighting a victory march? What are you, delusional? You haven't even begun fighting. But it's confidence. You see it before any game, you see it before any battle, you see it's a confidence thing. Because when you're confident and you know you can win a battle, you fight very differently. If you have doubts whether you can win, or you're sure you can't, trust me, you won't fight the same way. One of the tragedies of Vietnam, lessons of Vietnam was, was the Great American Army fighting the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong was a small army. They didn't even have close to the weapons and the manpower, firepower that the United States had. But the United States didn't know why they were fighting. They didn't know if they could win. It was a war without a objective. No one knew what we're fighting for. No one knew whether you could even win. So you can have the biggest army if you don't have the confidence, or definitely don't know that whether you can win. You're not going to win a war. And 5 people can win a war against 1 million because they have the confidence. Obviously, firepower counts for something, but it's not going to count for the main thing, which is the drive. And the drive comes from an inner place, and a blessing is that's what it activates. When you receive a blessing, in this case, Jacob blessed the tribes, each one with their meaning, that's the expression. According to their destiny, that's what he blessed them, telling them, you have this power to do so. And never forget that. And that unwavering commitment is in itself the way you reveal that type of power. So the first statement about predestiny is this. What you think may be not working for you may just be your own fears. May have nothing to do. When people say, my life is predestined, it's already been written, that's a good cop-out of avoiding having to do the work and addressing something. No person on this earth is here by accident. The mere fact that you're alive right now is a vote of confidence from God that He put you here. Simple as that. And every morning we wake up and we say Moda Ani, we acknowledge, we're acknowledging that. So I don't, when someone says, I believe in God, and then they tell me they don't believe in themselves, to me that's a contradiction of terms. You believe in God, then you have to believe that God put you here, and He believes in you. So why didn't you believe in yourself? So you have to wonder how much belief in God you really have. Maybe your belief in God is just lip service. It's what cultural faith it's called. Belief in God means the ultimate value of belief in God is not just some statement, and I'm going to do a lot of mitzvahs. Belief in God means that God created the human being in the divine image, placed you on this earth, a divine force of change. You have the power to change the world. That's the basic verses in the beginning of Genesis. Someone doesn't accept that, the rest of the Torah has really no meaning. If you don't accept that you are a human being with divine power, which is why Genesis and Bereshit begins with that, then what power do you have to overcome challenges, to be nonconformist, to stand up against the tide, to not bow to Haman and to all the other forces of this world? The only reason is because you have a divine power. And if the Jewish people are a witness to anything, is that when you're committed to that, you survive it all, despite all the empires who had far more power did not. Exactly like Vietnam. The Roman Empire was maybe the strongest and greatest empire in history. And yet it fell. Every one of them fell. Jewish people were the weakest, least armies, the least money, and they were here because they had that connection. When you have that supreme confidence, everything changes. So the bottom line is, it's understanding that you're not here by accident. You're born every morning anew. Means that there's a vote of confidence of the choreographer, the cosmic architect of this world, and says, I want you here. I'm giving you another day. And live up to it. How many of us live up to our potential? Well, we get distracted by all kinds of means. I need to make a living, I need to do this, I need to do that. Before I get to my mission, I have a whole bunch of things to do. As they say, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So you're busy with all kinds of things. By the time you think about, okay, what about the core mission? Why you were here? Most of us don't have much time to think about that. So that's like a business running without a mission statement, essentially. Which we know how ludicrous that is, but that's how we function, many of us. What's your personal mission in life? That's the heart of confidence, knowing that you're here for a purpose, knowing that you're indispensable, what you have to accomplish in this world. No one that ever lived and no one that ever will live can do what you have to do. That's the number one axiom, the number one foundation of everything else. Because remember, if you don't really matter, then all your choices don't really matter. As I said earlier from Kehelet, the more things change, the more the generation comes, generation goes, and nothing new under the sun. Under the sun, there's nothing new. But above the sun, everything is new. So if you become, you succumb to this resignation, then what happens is your life becomes one of essentially meaningless. Optional, you can say. I do it, okay, great. If I don't do it, also not so terrible. But that type of compelling sense of urgency, that I'm needed, and I'm indispensable, can only come from that complete unwavering commitment that you were sent here, you're put here, and every day is given to you a fresh day. It's a gift, it's a blessing. Don't take for granted every second of your life. Most of us do. Until, God forbid, there's a crisis. A health crisis, a loss, so on, something like that. Suddenly mortality comes to mind. So the first most challenging thing is to help people understand that. If you understand that, guaranteed that whole issue of predestined, is my life predestined, that whole resigned question of resignation disappears. Someone who's driven like that does not think in terms of, oh, I was born into that family or this family and I have this challenge and this weakness. They look at it like every life is full of challenges. Everyone's gotten their deck of cards. And no deck of cards is easy. Some people growing up in poverty have the worst and harshest challenges. Some people growing up in wealth have the harshest challenges. I've never seen a rule that says that everyone grew up in privilege is very refined and moral human beings, and everyone born in poverty are cruel and demoralized. There are people who grew up in the harshest circumstances and are the most refined creatures on earth, and there are people who grew up in the best privileges and they're the ugliest creatures on earth. So clearly circumstances are just factors. We are not victim of circumstances, is rule number one. I'm not available if that's for me, by the way. Okay. We're not victim of circumstances. The statement of a victim is that a victim says, what's going to happen? A leader says, what are we going to do about it? It's very different. And what do they say about that joke? They say about the three leaders, the Jewish leader, the Muslim leader, the Christian leader, are all told that the world in 2 weeks is going to be covered in water. Okay, so the Muslims gather to pray and finally return their souls to their garden with all the, whatever they have up there, the virgins, etc. And then the Christians, the Christian leaders get together and they pray for their kingdom in heaven. And the Jewish leader gets up and says, okay, listen guys, we have 2 weeks to figure out how to live underwater. Okay? So, there's a very big difference in what a leader does and what someone else does. The Jewish people are, as I said, a testimony to this attitude. There's no such thing as impossible. Which means we have everything we need inside of us. And this leads us to point number 2, which is that there are things that may be not there in your potential, but even that's possible. And that was revealed in Yom Kippur. So most of the year, to get to a place that you're not a victim, to transcend your circumstances, is simply becoming aware that you have a divine force inside of you. It's giving you life. It's a vote of confidence every second that you're here, because you wouldn't be breathing with that will not there, with that renewed contract not there. It's as simple as that. Now, I know we take everything for granted. That's why King David says at the end of the book of Psalms, I'll call neshama tahalal ka. Right? It says that every soul praises God, and the Medrash says there, the Medrash Tillim says, I'll call neshima, every breath, twice. Every breath, and every breath we take, we should thank God. Because neshama, the word for soul in Hebrew, comes from the same root as the word neshima, as breath, which is essentially what it states in the Torah right in the beginning. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, that God breathed His breath into the earth, into the dust, which turned the human being into Adam. So it's breath and life are one. Kol neshima neshima. So every breath you take. The problem is we take for granted our lives. As the Baal Shem Tov says, the difference between a miracle and a natural event is only one thing: frequency. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetimes, everybody would come out and there'd be television crews and we'd be taking pictures. Look at this, wow, a ball rising in the horizon. Like some people do when there's a solar eclipse. But since it happens every morning, big thing. Since we breathe all the time, and we take 18 breaths for a healthy person every minute, so you can do the math, how many breaths we take a day. How many people even know how many breaths they take a day? Who's counting? It's a given. Then you go, God forbid, to a hospital and you see someone who's struggling to breathe and they're on a machine. You suddenly realize, hey, 1 second, what does it take to breathe? Study it a bit. How many dynamics does it take for one breath to go down your lungs? It's a pretty complicated process, actually. That first of all, the air should go in the right pipe, not in the wrong one. And then how it travels and how it enters the lung and how the lung functions and how it all turns into oxygen. It's a very complicated process that most of us are probably completely unaware of. But most of the things we're unaware of, we don't see it as a gift necessarily. We see it as it's my right. We're entitled, which is great. But it's a gift. That's the first basis of all of anything in life. You say, God. What's God? God is respecting that you don't own yourself. You know, one of the laws, it says a person is not allowed to self-mutilate. You're not allowed to mutilate your body, which is why in Judaism there's a forbidden to engrave tattoos or to mutilate yourself. You could say, I'm not hurting anyone else. I'm doing it to myself, because it says that Rabbi writes, because your body is not yours. It's a gift. It was given to you to protect. Someone gives you a gift. What do? You mutilate it. You give it back the best possible, which is also why we don't cremate. You give back the gift the way it was given to you, as best as you could. Obviously, it's the wear and tear of life. That's part of but you give it back without doing any extra damage or extra changes to what was given to you. I'll offer tashuv. So in other words, there's a certain respect of the sanctity of your own life, not just other people's lives. Everything is sacred. They tell the story of one of the Rebbes. He was walking with his little son, who would later become the next Rebbe, and they were walking in the woods, and he tore off a leaf from the tree, the child. Like anyone, and just rubbed it inadvertently. And his father reprimanded him and said, what right do you have to affect the trajectory of this leaf's evolution? This leaf has its own life. You just ripped it off and just rubbed it. Which, of course, in Torah, Bal Tashchis, which means you're not allowed to damage anything, even mineral, vegetable, not just humans. And this was a tremendous lesson in life, but the sensitivity. Everything is sacred. Everything is there for a purpose. So even though it's not a great act of selfishness in the broadest way, like someone going and damaging, but even the tearing of a leaf in almost a dismissive way, seemingly insignificant. No, it's a sensitivity that everything is a gift. Everything is given to you, and there's potential. Which means basically this: every person you're going to meet from here on, and from till now as well, but I can't talk about the past. Every person you meet, every encounter, every street you'll walk on, every breath you take, is there deliberately predestined, yes, for you to be there. That's the predestined part. And the rest is up to you. What are you going to do with it? Will you appreciate it? And will you actualize its potential? You ask a hardcore business person who owns a business, do they work 9 to 5? They work 24/7. Everywhere they go, even if it's out of hours, even if it's some leisure thing, they're always thinking of how they can use a situation and encounter for potential for their business. Well, this is how the Torah trains us to think as human beings. Everything is a spiritual opportunity. To use the words of the Kabbalistic terms, everything has sparks in it, divine sparks waiting for you to release them. So you're allocated, each of us is allocated with an amount of sparks. That includes what home you grew up in, what family, what people you know, what places you've been to, what opportunities come your way, and your personality, all the details of your life. All of it, yes, is a deck of cards that was given to you. But now comes the main thing: is what are you going to do with it? Will you actualize the potential that's trapped in it, or will you just ignore it? Or even worse, not only will you ignore it, you'll use it for your own selfish purposes, maybe even destructive ones, God forbid. And that's completely up to us. That's not predestined. Are you going to actualize your potential? The fact that you have circumstances, fine. Now, the challenge is, are you going to remain a victim of your circumstances, or you're not? That was the key when Jacob blessed and crossed his hands, tale of two hands, crossed his hands and blessed Ephraim, telling him, this is your destiny, now you live up to it, and this is yours. And this was not changeable. He could not put his right hand on Menashe, because he was talking about opening up a channel. It's like saying, this person is destined to be an artist, this one's destined to be a business person. Jacob knew that, so obviously he's not going to put his hand that's going to bless the artist to be a business person and the business person to be an artist. That would not be very a good blessing. That's when it comes to blessing. And then there's step 2, that when you knock down the doors, you can even open up channels that were not even predestined to be part of it. It's not even your potential. Even that's possible. So bottom line is, there's nothing in life that you cannot achieve. It's either directly part of your legacy and your destiny because it's in your potential, or if necessary, it's something to open up a new channel. I would obviously first figure out whether maybe it's yours and you don't need to go open up new doors. Maybe just sitting waiting for it to be released, and you may be the block. You may be your own worst enemy and not letting it out. So for that, we need to have friends, trusted friends, people you invite into your life, and you invite them to kick you in the pants if necessary, meaning to challenge you. That's the greatest gift you can have, because many of us like friends who just say yes. They call the amen corner, say amen to everything. That everything, many of us go to somebody and say, I'd like your opinion on something. In truth is, you don't really want their opinion. You want them to just confirm what you feel. And you say, and when you ask them, do you really want my opinion? The real answer is yes. If you agree with me, I want it. But obviously most people are not going to say that, because then it's not, you want an opinion. But most people don't want to hear that everything you did was a waste and it was no good. You want to hear that you're more or less on the right track. Accountants always complain. They say they pay us top dollar not to listen to our advice. You hire a consultant not to listen to. So at least you can say you hired a consultant, and then you end up not anyway listening, or at least fitting that advice into what you thought was your, to fit in with your initial thinking. It's not that easy to hear something disagreeable. Let's be honest. To hear that maybe you're doing it all wrong, because it makes you feel, it feeds into our own insecurities and our fears and so on. So the bottom line is, my friends, that we have potentials far beyond our imagination. The challenge is to build the confidence and have people that help you build the confidence to access it. And if necessary, to go to the step 2, which is to open up new channels, if necessary. But I would submit that my observations in life, my experience is that most things are there for the taking. You don't need to break down necessarily and open up new channels. Sometimes one needs that. But first, let's eliminate the things that we have available in our own potential. And that requires finding, as I said, friends, finding people who can help build your confidence. And I know that it's not that simple, because if you've grown up in a home, in an environment, or in a society which is constantly cultivating, by the way, fear, think of it this way. Every time, the whole advertising industry, the whole marketing industry is built on telling you that if you buy this product or this service, you're going to be a happier person. That by in effect is basically saying if you don't buy it, you're going to be miserable because everyone else has it. I think I mentioned this once. I was once in Lima, Peru for a conference. It was titled Happiness. So there were two featured speakers. I was a featured speaker coming from a so-called mystical, psychological, spiritual perspective. And there was a psychologist there coming from a more of a secular psychological perspective. He was a Jewish guy, very interesting fellow. And we both made our presentation. It was a very interesting conference. I remember one thing that he said, actually two things that I'd like to mention. He brought up, he said that there are studies that show that per capita the happiest people in the world are in Holland, of all places. Yeah, Holland. And people are wondering why. How they measured happiness, I'm not really sure, but that's what they said. Holland. So the theories go like this: that Holland is one of these socialist countries, and there's free health insurance and some other amenities, and therefore there's less misery. As if to say that health insurance is going to cause us to be happier. But there are other theories as well. And he came up with a new theory, and this is what he shared. He said that in the Western world, there are studies that show that the average person by the time you turn age 20, you have seen or heard 1 million advertisements. 1 million. Whether on television, radio, or of course internet, billboards, magazines, newspapers. 1 million advertisements by the time you're age 20. It's an interesting number. So he said that he feels that when you show someone options, the more options they have, the more misery they can have, because they see, because no question, there's 1 million advertisements. You didn't buy 1 million products. That means you see all these things. You're feeling that everyone else has it and you don't. Basically, it develops a deep sense of deprivation. I don't have this, because that's the whole point of the ad, is to tell you drive this car, you wear this perfume, you travel to this place, you have this gadget, you're a better person, you're cooler, whatever it is, you're more handsome, you're sexier. So all this is essentially a message. It's telling you also that if you don't have it, you're not like that. That means our value is based on you buying this product. Who's going to advertise an advertisement that will say in big, bold words, birth is God saying you matter. You matter simply because you exist. Why should anyone pay for buy such an ad? Because there's no product. You don't need to buy anything. That God gave it to you for free, life. But no one tells you life is valuable even if you don't have this product. Who's going to tell you that? It's counter the whole capitalistic marketing system. So he suggested in Holland, there are no public billboards. There's no public advertising. And therefore, because people are not inundated with ads all the time, they have other ads, but not that, that's why they're happier people. Now, whether this is true about Holland or not, I'm not sure, but it was an interesting observation about that sometimes the prosperity of our times, and today everything, you can do anything. You can press any button and deliver any type of food 24/7, all year round. You can have fruits that once didn't exist. They're out of season. There's no such thing as out of season. We're completely out of touch with the natural seasons and natural cycles. In New York, you go, how many stores are open all night? You can buy anything, literally anything. So it's great on one hand, but also creates a certain delusion. A delusion of, hey, I can do anything. And then you find that you can't. And you find that personal relationships aren't better off because we have all these comforts. Tell me, has personal relationships, intimacy, benefited from texting and from smartphones? Or has it actually undermined it? You don't really have conversations with anyone. I mentioned I was driving in a car with somebody, trying to get his attention, trying to have a little conversation. He's busy texting. So what did I do? I texted him. So he looks at the text. I remember he's looking at it. Like, where's this? And then he realizes I'm sitting near him. And he says to me, why are you texting me? You're sitting near me. I said, because I can't get your attention. This was the irony. So people sit at meetings. So we have all this. On Facebook, they called friends. Have you become a friendlier person with more friends since technologies arose? And I'm not from these fire and brimstone anti-technology. I use it all the time. But all it is a tool. If you're an intimate, warm person, you'll be warm, and technology, like they say, junk in, junk out. Then technology will be an extension of your warmth. And if you're a cold, detached person who's afraid of commitments and afraid of your own shadow, technology is not going to help you much. It can create the delusion because it keeps you busy, and you can convince yourself, I'm connected to so many people, and not connected to anyone. So the point is that it all comes down to what's going on inside here. And the point of the happiness that I was mentioning was that sometimes, yes, all these options don't necessarily give you control. It's an illusion of control. It ultimately comes down to knowing that the things that are most valuable are free, and starts with life itself. That you can breathe, that you wake up in the morning, and recognizing that that is the essence of your life, the mission that you're on, and that nothing is impossible. Because that vote of confidence tells you whatever you set your mind you can do, and it's inside of you. And as I said before, I believe that most people have the potential for anything they want. Potential, I'm not even talking about new channels. The potential, what's simply missing is their own confidence. And all these distractions of everyone else telling you what is going to make you happy. You get this, you get that. Is it self-generated from within? What will make you happy is what comes from within here, not what someone else is selling to you. If it's so important, you'll go out and look for it. Very often if someone's selling you something, you say, I must buy this. So then you ask yourself the question, one second, why didn't you need to buy it yesterday if it's so important? If it's so important, why are you waiting for someone to come to you? Maybe it's not so important. Maybe they convinced you it's important. Now, obviously, sometimes an opportunity comes your way and you have to look at it. But many, many things, just because someone told it to you, doesn't mean it's the most important thing for you, just because it comes down from generating it from within. And as I said earlier, a person looks around at life, just like a businessman, everything is a spiritual opportunity. Everything is a divine spark waiting to be released. And that divine spark is your potential, and is the potential that lies trapped within that opportunity, within that particular interaction. And this comes down to, yes, our interactions, even when you're sitting in a subway or in a cab, or the people we meet, even though we may be talking to them about business or pleasure or some other things that are completely meaningless, there's a reason that you two met. And that reason is far greater than just a casual, temporary exchange. Something eternal can come out of it. So imagine you're looking at your life, that everything you meet is opportunity. It's a whole different way of looking at life. Then you're not going to ask the question, hey, one second, I grew up in this home, in this environment, this deck of cards. That's fine, but now what are you doing with it? We all have a deck of cards. The grass always looks green on the other side. Everyone has a preset amount of elements that have been decided for you. The question is now, what are you going to do about it? The Baal Shem Tov, one of the favorite stories I've shared often. Baal Shem Tov once sent Mordechai, not Mordechai, his name was, will come to me in a moment, Chaim Rappaport. He was a big tzaddik of his time, and he sent him on some mission. He came back, we don't even know what the mission was, and the Baal Shem Tov started grilling him, questioning how he traveled. Okay, he wants to know. So he said, I went through this town, that town. No, but I want to know the details, the Baal Shem Tov said. So he said, okay, I slept over in this town. The next day I traveled. The next night I didn't have where to sleep over, so I rested at the side of the road. And what happened in the morning? In the morning I woke up, I washed my hands, said my prayers, and then I sat down to have something to eat. And I took a drink. There was a little fountain. There was a brook of water on the side. I took a drink of water, made a blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem, Sha'akalni b'dvarei. And the Baal Shem Tov jumped up, literally excited. Chaim was wondering, what's he so excited about? And he said, this brook of water was waiting for you to come from the beginning of time. This brook of water was waiting for you to come and make a blessing on it. And that's the story. And I've traveled many places. I always think of this, and I always tell the story. I always tell, but very often. You know, sometimes you go to a place, like sometimes you go to the woods, here's like a place you don't know if did any human being ever walk here before. So there's always the path, as Robert Frost puts it, the road more traveled on. And then there's the road less traveled, the one that most people don't take. And there's something exhilarating about taking a path nobody has walked on before. But to put it in the Baal Shem Tov's words, which is a Torah concept, that this path, this space here was waiting from the beginning of time for you to come and do something good there. It's a tremendous attitude to life. Because then everything you do, everything, even window shopping, things that seemingly are completely trivial and meaningless, are filled with all kinds of potential opportunity. I always mention that Shabbaton I went to. I was a guest at a Shabbos lecture at a place in East Hampton a number of years ago. I'm driving Friday afternoon. I stop at a gas station. Right? Okay, who doesn't stop at gas stations? It's another one of those little things we do. And I fill up my car. As I'm filling up my car, there was a guy comes over to me. He's an attendant. Right next to the gas station was a club, and he's parking cars for the guests coming for the Friday night festivities. And he asked me if I'm here to stay for this party. So I said, no, I have another party to go to. And we start talking. He was like intrigued with me. And he says to me, so who am I? What do I do? So I told him I write, I teach spiritual, psychological stuff. I had no clue who this guy was. And I, not that I dismissed him, but so he says to me, can I get your, I told him, I send out a weekly email. He said, put me on your list. I'd like to get your emails. Out of the blue. So that's what I did. And I forgot about it. I mean, I didn't forget. I remember, obviously, but it went back to my unconscious mind. Anyway, I go to Shabbaton. I was going to the Shabbaton. That was my main thing. The gas station was just seemingly, you had to just fill up for gas. I ended up in this gas station. Put him on the list. He's getting the emails. At least 5 years later. I never heard from him. One day I get an email from this guy. He writes to me. He says, you probably don't remember me. I look like one of these rednecks that you thought was just, the parking attendant. I happen to be Jewish. I lost my parents when I was young to an accident, and I never had any Jewish education. Everything I know about Judaism, I've learned the last 5 years from your emails. That's what he told me. He says to me, I pray with them, Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the Parsha. He writes a whole list of and I saw, he was sincere. He said, this is my connection. So you never know, he writes to me, as you write often, why you meet somebody. You thought it was gas, parking cars. I want you to know that it's changed my life in that way. Now, had it not been no emails, and I would be giving this class, what's the likelihood he's going to come here from wherever he was living in Long Island, and so on. Small little thing, email. And I realized right there, maybe that's why God created email. Maybe that's why there's technology in the first place. Now, I understand business people think it's for them, and people who are looking for fun and entertainment think it's for them. But we all know those are not necessarily life core missions, because it was for them. If there was no internet, they also were running businesses beforehand. The power of technology is a power that was hidden in nature. Talk about potential from the beginning of time. You think when Adam and Eve in Gan Eden, there were no subatomic particles, there was no electricity. They just didn't know about it. It was hidden in this world. Nothing new was discovered when they discovered the technology that we have today. The potential was discovered, and then we learned how to manipulate that potential, and therefore, and resulting in technologies that we have today. Forces of gravity, of electromagnetism, of subatomic particles, of nuclear energy, cellular technology. All of this existed embedded in nature, waiting for years to be released. That's what a blessing does. It helps release it. It's all there. So no one can ever say, what kind of potential does this universe contain? Who knows? Look what it's already yielded. The same is true within the microcosm of each human being. And this story just captures the same idea. Here's a guy, I met him. I could have easily not told him what I do, said I'm in a rush. After that, I became this harvester of emails. Wherever I go, I always collect emails, because I always remember this story. And I say, you never know. Email is such an easy way to make a connection. People wonder, what can I do? A good thing? Share a nice email with somebody. Easiest thing to do. It costs you nothing. It's a press of a button. This is a way of so-called redeeming technology. The Orthodox world a few years ago is still up in arms what to do about this threatening internet. Maybe for every one email they send out in business, send 5 emails that share warm words with somebody. And you're using technology for what it should be used. Instead of seeing it as an enemy, why don't you see it as an asset, an ally to do God's work, if you're so godly. So this is an attitude, as I said, based on the Baal Shem Tov, it's an attitude, everything has sparks in it. And this is not predestined. This is what you're going to do about it. What kind of personality you have, what schools you went to, yes, that was given to you. For good or for bad, as I mentioned. But what you're going to do with it, the potential you have, it all comes down to, do you believe in yourself in this way? Do you believe that God is wise enough to have given you the strength to face the challenges of your life? There's an expression in the Medrash that says, when Moses built the temple, so he said to God, how is mortal human beings, going to build a temple for you? You're God. Immortal, the creator. We're just mortal creatures. Finite creatures. How are we going to serve the infinite? A similar question King Solomon said to God when the temple was being built. Shamayim v'shmei shamayim lo yichal kalucha. Heavens and heavens of heavens cannot contain you. Afki abayis hazeh, this little house, this little structure on earth can contain you. He said to God. And God responded and said, exactly as you said, just don't read it as a question, read it as an answer. Not bitmiya, but binechusa is the expression. He says, heaven and heavens can't contain me. Afki abayis, this house can contain me. Yes, because I give you that power. And God answers to Moses the same thing. I am not asking you to do something on my terms. Eini mivakesh lefi keichi, he says. I don't ask you to do something that I am able to do, meaning God can do. Eini mivakesh lefi keichon. I only ask you to do what you're capable of doing. And if I created you, I'm giving you every power to deal with the challenges. You know, today the big hits are the survivor reality shows. Whatever reality means. New definition on reality. It's like, they say like spontaneous dancing at 9 o'clock or something. Like reality show, So there's survivor. You come to an island or whatever situation. Everything you need to survive is there, but you have to discover it. This is a type of parody, maybe, a takeoff of essentially what real life is about. And that is, God puts you here on this earth, said, I've embedded in you and downloaded into you all the powers that you need to face any challenge. That's the greatest blessing a person could have. If you were asked whether you have 2 options, that you should have a life with no challenges, no difficulties, or option 2, that whatever challenge or difficulty comes your way, you have the power to navigate and get through and grow through, which would you choose? So the immature response, of course, is number 1. I want a life with no challenges, no difficulties. The wise response, the mature response is, give me all the difficulties you want, but obviously not over, but give me the strength. No, I have the strength to overcome anything. That's far more empowering. King Solomon, when he was asked, what do you want? Give me wisdom. He didn't say, don't get rid of my pain, get rid of worries and concerns, He said, no, bring it all on, but give me the wisdom and the power to deal with anything. That's what a true powerful person is. Not that they know the future, not that they don't have many challenges, is that whatever challenge comes their way, they take it on and know they have the confidence to navigate through anything. So yes, a small little story here with Jacob crossing his hands can give us a message, a lesson of what potential is and what power we have. And of course, the step number 2, as I said, if push comes to shove, sometimes we are able to open up new doors as well. But that's another story and not necessary in many cases. In most cases, it's really building confidence within us all to be able to take on anything. So think about this. I can't say we can have an attitude 24/7 like the Baal Shem Tov expected, that wherever you walk, every step you take, every breath you take, long before the Police sang the song, is that every step and every breath has infused with purpose. But even if you think about it once a day, and look at one thing that you've done and say, hey, what's the opportunity here? You'll move over from being a victim to being in control. Because there's 2 options in life. You're either going to be influenced or you will be an influencer. Like they say, I've mentioned many times, as journalists say, there are people who make things happen, there are people who watch things happen, and there are people who ask what happened. And we have the ability to make things happen. That's how a leader thinks. You don't think in terms of, look what others are doing or wait to see what the circumstances bring. The circumstances come your way, the question is now, what are you going to do with them? And the person who's empowered is understanding a sense of mission, a sense of urgency, and in the sense that I have within me all the resources I need, now I have to actualize them, takes on all these challenges in a completely different way. So I bless you all. I specifically word the word blessing. And if it needs a prayer, let it be a prayer as well, that you should actualize your great potential. And the first step is becoming aware of it. And becoming aware of it, it's like any type of incubation. You hang around with people who actualize their potential, it usually helps. You hang around with people who are the opposite, it usually doesn't help. Because misery loves company. So unactualized people like other unactualized people. It makes them feel better. Because hanging around with people that are actualized doesn't make you feel good when you see that you are in that state. So it's about, number 1, hanging around, looking at your, what they call Rolodex today. It's not a Rolodex, whatever, your address book, your contact list, your CMR, whatever it is, and you to look and see who you're hanging around with. There are people you make a phone call to with very excited, very inspired, and they're the first to make sure to throw cold water and tell you don't get so excited. I've heard you this way in the past. The honeymoon will be over very quickly, type of thing, And then there are people that you have to introduce into your life that you call them and they give you a vote of confidence, believe in you. These are people who help you begin actualizing your potential. So it's 2 steps: becoming aware of what that is and being around the people, the coaches, so to speak, and the environment that help you actualize it. So that's my humble blessing to everybody here. And with that said, I hope everybody has found something meaningful in some of the words I've shared here. And as I said, you can take it out of the Torah. I try to present it in a way that even if Torah turns you off, or the word and the stereotypes do, hopefully this message is universal enough that you can relate to. But it's really actually the inside story of Jacob's 2 hands and how he used them when he blessed his grandchildren. So everyone should have a very meaningful and actualized week. And until next Wednesday, it's an honor to be giving this class, to be sharing let's call this the intersecting in this trajectory of our lives of indispensable souls, each with their own indispensable, unique mission. Like musical notes in a large composition, each of us are an indispensable musical note. And the music cannot be complete without your note being played, and it can't be complete without the rest of us. So we need each other. At the same time, each of us has to do our part. So Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night, Philip Namworth, who's actually a singer-songwriter himself in the real world. And we will continue next Wednesday night in this journey. And please stay in touch. If you haven't given us your email contact information, I told you before I harvest emails based on that story. So please do so. Stay in touch. And if any other way I could help you, or we, the Meaningful Life Center, could help you in your journey, please don't hesitate to ask. Everyone have a very good evening and a very good week. Be well. Yes.